Hi guys, so today I want to give you the lowdown on how I ink my illustrations by hand and then color them digitally in Photoshop. Now, before I proceed, I do want to say that this is not the way that you should do it. This is only one way that you can make an illustration. So if you're curious about how I do it and you're interested in my style and you want to learn more, keep on watching. So the first thing I want to say is that even though my inking process may look very, confident and loose and serendipitous almost, this is merely the result of many hours, many days, many years of practice. So I know that sounds kind of like a bummer, but that's the truth. So the first thing I want to say, my first bit of advice, is that if you want to get to this point, you do have to practice drawing a lot. And I personally usually take a few days out of the week to just sit down and pull up an image that I really like and just simply copy it in my sketchbook. And you can do this too. I would recommend that you try practicing to draw every day, but if you don't have the time, just do it as much as you possibly can. Just, maybe make a schedule or whatever. And I also would really recommend that you practice drawing from life, especially if you're starting out. I would definitely recommend, maybe sitting at a cafe, drawing the life around you, and also going to life drawing classes. Those are really important. I should definitely go again, but I do want to say that, I am able to kind of like take the lazy route in a sense and practice drawing from images because I've spent a lot of time in life drawing classes. So I kind of know what the real thing looks like, and I'm not really just relying on just photos to tell me what things look like, if that makes sense. Moving on, as you can see, I have about 2 layers of underdrawings underneath the ink. One is a blue pencil and the other one is a mechanical pencil. And with the blue pencil, I'm really taking time to figure out what the structure is of all of the elements in this image. So in this case, people. I'm really spending time making sure the proportions are correct and just that everything looks right, I guess. And again, this can be really frustrating if you're a beginner and you don't really have human proportions figured out quite yet, and trust me, I still don't really get them right from time to time, and you may notice in this image there are some proportions that are off, but it's okay because for my illustration process, it's not like I'm selling the original, so I will actually edit my inked layer in Photoshop. So I don't really mind so much if I don't have everything 100% correct. But anyway, so I have the structure figured out, and then on top of that I do a mechanical pencil layer. And the reason for this is that I find that mechanical pencils mimic the feel of regular ink pens quite well. So this is kind of hard to explain, but I have the, flexibility of drawing with a pencil, and I can still erase things if I make mistakes, but I'm kind of practicing for the lead up to drawing with actual ink pens. And I find this really important because in the past I used to do my underlayers in regular pencil, but I find that drawing with regular pencils does kind of have a different feel in a sense. So yeah, I just find the mechanical pencil is a really nice bridge to the figuring out stuff with the blue pencil and then the ink pen. So the next piece of advice is maybe a bit basic, but make sure that when you're drawing smaller details, use the appropriate pen size. I am normally using 2 to 3 different line weights for my drawings. I don't really use that many. I like to keep it pretty basic. So yeah, use smaller pens for smaller details, especially in the face and just maybe patterns and clothing or even stuff in the background may need to be done with smaller line weights. Finally, try to have fun. I know that's very cliche advice, but you don't want a drawing that looks very stiff, right? So once you've had your basic structures figured out. When you do the inking on top, it's basically like a stylistic cloak. You can have fun with some of the details and just kind of speed through them and make them look really loose and just add your own flair to it. You don't have to follow exactly the drawing that you did underneath. Just, you know, you're ready, figured out the basic structure, try to let loose, let the basic structure kind of guide you, but still kind of keep it loose and just keep it chill is the best way I can put it. Even if you start making mistakes and you don't really like how you've made your marks, just try to keep going and keep going with the flow. Again, I know that sounds really cliche, but the minute you start worrying and start fretting, that will show in your drawing. So it's really better to just be confident and keep loose, and that'll show. Personally, I like to put on some music that really gets me in the zone and just focus on the drawing at hand and just really get into it. And I really like that feeling a lot, and I definitely recommend for you to also put on your favorite music and get into the inking and just get lost in it. And yeah, anyway, moving on to the rest of the illustration process. For this next step, I'm not going to go too in-depth about the individual techniques that I use, because otherwise this video would be too long. This is kind of like a general guideline only. If you have any questions, please do leave them down below, or maybe if you want, I can make another video on a subject that you feel may need more attention. Anyway, so after scanning the image in at 600 dpi, removing the white background and then cropping the image down to an A4 size, I then proceed to edit the layout and line work of the drawing. By the way, I don't work on the original drawing layer. Instead, I duplicate it and keep the original layer hidden as a safety precaution. The tools I use to edit are the lasso tool, the clone stamp tool, the eraser, and a Photoshop brush that mimics the original line work quite well. For this, I highly suggest that you check out Kyle T. Webster's Photoshop brush sets if you haven't already, because he has a lot of great traditional looking brushes. I'll leave links down below to all of my resources as usual. Now, before I get more into the individual tools that I use, I just want to say that one thing I find very helpful during the editing process is actually compiling a list of all the things I find the most important to edit before I get started. This helps me focus on only the most important things so I don't go overboard or off track, which is actually quite easy to do, and then you waste a lot of time and yeah. Anyway, with the lasso tool, I surgically cut out bits that I want to move or resize or rotate if I think they're looking a little bit out of proportion, like I mentioned with the body parts earlier, or I move them if I think it'll serve the layout better. Having removed the white background beforehand makes this whole process a lot easier. And then with the clone stamp tool and the brush, I then fill out the areas where I've made very obvious cutouts, or I go in and rework stuff like in the facial features. You may notice that I also copy stuff from the original layer and then fuse them with the edited drawing, almost like doing a line work graft or something. This is because in some of the instances I still like the feel of the original drawing, even though it wasn't 100% perfect. After I've done most of the adjustments, I go around with the eraser tool to get rid of little specks of line work left behind from all of my previous incisions. I know that all of this cutting out and filling back in and cleaning up may seem like a lot of work, but luckily, since my style is kind of rough and loose, I can afford to actually leave some of that brokenness and texture, so I don't actually have to be too thorough with this step. The final thing that I want to add that may seem a little off topic, but nevertheless, which I still find kind of important, is that I know it can feel like cheating when you digitally manipulate your image, but at the end of the day, illustration is not just about being a drawing purist. You do have to be good at drawing, yes, but illustration is also about being able to design and find any means possible in creating the most effective image. So I just want to say, please don't let old notions about what it means to be a so-called illustrator or artist hold you back from actually creating the thing that you want to make. So just do it and don't stand in your own way. Anyway, moving on to the coloring process. So before I start coloring, I like to figure out a color palette, and in this case I'm going with something very minimal, very monochromatic, and I'm also figuring out a secondary color scheme just for the skin tones. And I find that having a guideline like this really saves me a lot of time. I do adjust the color scheme later on down the line, but like I said, having the guideline is a big time saver. Then the next thing I do is I add a grainy texture on top and a halftone layer, and the halftone layer I will hide initially using a layer mask, and then at the end I reintroduce that into my image as shading and embellishment. And I also play around with the color of the line work a little bit, and I usually wouldn't know to add these textures from the get-go if I were to be starting this illustration from scratch, but because this is a process that I've worked with many times already, I already knew that I wanted to work with these particular textures. And having a process like this, which I know really well and have worked with many times, really helps me have a very consistent illustration style, which I can offer to potential clients as an efficient and reliable service. You may notice that I've cut out and sped up a lot of the footage in this video just because my illustration coloring process is very slow and repetitive, and the reason for that is that I don't tend to use any color fills when working with this Photoshop brush, just because I find that coloring by hand really highlights the really lovely marker texture of this Photoshop brush. I don't know, if any of you guys have any suggestions for how I can retain this marker texture but then also speed up my illustration process, I would love to know your suggestions. But for now, this is what I'm working with. I don't have any special techniques for coloring other than just to distribute all the colors evenly throughout the image, and just to have all the colors on separate layers in case I have to adjust any of them later on down the line. All of my brushes are from Kyle T. Webster, by the way. If you're curious about any of the brushes I use and all of the other tools that I use, please see all the links down below as usual. And then at the end of my coloring process, I add the halftone texture as shading and embellishment, like I said, using a layer mask. And I actually really don't shade that much, just because I find that my line work and my textures add a lot of depth to my illustration already. And yeah, I'm also really not that good at lighting and shading, so I feel like playing with textures and my line work make up for that. Anyway, that is basically it for my illustration process. I hope that you liked watching it. I hope that you liked my explanation, and you can see this illustration in full on my website, links down below as usual. And please do subscribe for more videos, and please leave comments down below for any video suggestions that you might have for me. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!